So I'd like to welcome you all to Yale Law School Mafia's boot camp on FOIA. Sorry, so feel free to grab some dinner while I'm speaking. My name is Jennifer Borg, and I'm one of the supervising attorneys and fellows at the Mafia Clinic. And for those of you who don't know what that means, that's the Media Freedom and Information Access Law Clinic here at Yale. And one of the other supervising attorneys is Tobin Raju. And I'd like to thank the student directors and Julia for setting this up, and particularly for our presenters, Nate Jones and Nathan Tempey, for coming from New York and from Washington this evening. And thank you all for being here this evening. As you can see from the title, it's going to be real tactical and practical. And if you would just please hold your questions till the end, but we'll probably end around 7, and then we'll have about a half an hour for Q&A. So I'm going to start with introducing you to Nathan. Nathan Tempey is a journalist and criminal defense investigator. His writing has appeared in Vice, Gothamist, New York Daily News, and elsewhere. His reporting has largely focused on housing, criminal justice, and power in and around New York City. He contributed research to a just-released podcast called The Burden about disgraced NYPD detective Louis Scarcella and the group of imprisoned men who exposed his misconduct and freed themselves in the process. And I can tell you it's terrific. His work with the Mafia Clinic on the deaths of people in Connecticut Department of Correction custody serves as the basis of his ongoing reporting by the Connecticut Mirror. Nathan's investigative work recently led to the exoneration of a man named Wayne Gardine, who spent 29 years incarcerated for a murder that the Manhattan legal system now agrees he did not commit. Nate Jones is the FOIA director for the Washington Post, where he works with reporters to target documents to request, appeal, and sue for. He works with the reporters to obtain local, state, and federal records and to think strategically about public records in all formats. He gives FOIA training sessions and advises reporters on how to rate, refine, and track requests, navigate delays, we all know there's lots of those, and over-redactions, and to overcome other bureaucratic resistance. He's also the author of the Revealing Records column, which describes the Post battles for public records. He served 2 terms on the Federal FOIA Advisory Committee and was previously the director of the FOIA Project for the National Security Archive, where he used FOIA to write a book on the 1983 Able Archer nuclear war scare. I'd also like to say thank you to our Zoom participants, and we will be, I guess, tracking for questions at the end if you want to use the chat feature. Before you all begin, Nate, I just wanted, because this is a committee and a project I was not aware of. Can you just briefly tell us about the Federal FOIA Advisory Committee and the FOIA Project for National Security Archive?
Sure. So National Security Archive is a nonprofit run out of George Washington University that's been going on for, I think, 35 years, since Iran-Contra, that uses FOIA to get important historic records. So in addition to being the best historian FOIAs, they also were in a bunch of early and ongoing still FOIA legal battles and won some great precedents. Part of the reason that news media has to pay almost nothing for federal FOIAs is a big court case they won. So they're historians, but they're FOIA heroes. So that's where I cut my teeth. I worked there for, I think, 12 years. And then the FOIA Advisory Committee is also something slightly less cool, but that is a federal advisory committee passed by an act of Congress. And the goal is to get people that work inside federal FOIA departments. I think there's 12 of them, and then people from outside of the government, I think there's 12 of them, to work together over a 2-year term to make recommendations on how to improve the FOIA process. You can't recommend law and wave a magic wand, but nonetheless, with the insiders and outsiders collaborating, a lot of good things do happen through it.
Well, thank you for having us, and thanks to everybody for coming out. I know it's not, every day that we get a chance to discuss something as exciting and cool as public records law. So I think so. Here we go.
I know, so we plan on, this is what Nathan and I plan to do. We're going to do a FOIA boot camp, let's call it. This is going to be, I think, more advanced and more difficult than you've heard before. This isn't just give you a template. We're going to be in the weeds. So that's the plan. We're planning to go for about the first hour. We're going to talk, give you guys our tips, and then we are literally blocking off 30 minutes to answer your questions at the end. So start thinking about questions or it'll get boring. That said, if there is something burning that we miss or something, raise your hand and we can get to it. But in general, it might be more productive if we do them at the end. So to start off, so this is something from one of my revealing records columns that I publish occasionally at the Washington Post. Shameless plug. But this is an example of the power of FOIA to me. So I did a FOIA request and technically presidential records request for all photographs taken from by the Obama White House on the day that bin Laden was killed. And we published a big story on it and lots of serious photos and Obama calling the Prime Minister of Pakistan and lots of good stuff. The photos never been seen before in the bunker where they heard where it was dictated that bin Laden was killed. But this one, depending on how you look at it, was a funny photo. What it is, if you can't see, it's the day after at Obama at a presidential daily brief with his chief of staff, and he's reading a printed out meme saying, "Sorry it took so long to get a copy of my birth certificate," which was a scandal about weeks before. "I was too busy killing Osama bin Laden." So on the one hand, it's FOIA. Without the Freedom of Information Act, the Washington Post wouldn't publish this. People wouldn't have gotten a chuckle. But on the other, more serious hand, I wanted to share it because this shows something that the official narrative didn't show. I don't know if you guys remember, but Obama said, "We're not going to spike the football about killing bin Laden. It's not funny." In his memoir, he talked about having a very stoic tone. If you remember, his speech was very stoic. But with FOIA, we get to see something behind the scenes that you don't get to see every time. And this is a funny one. And we'll talk about, there are more serious ones than this. So with that said, this is pretty much going to be our roadmap for today. 1, find where to file, find the law. 2, make sure your FOIAs are targeted. 3, because everyone always wants to talk about them, emails. 4, tracking your FOIAs. 5, appeal, which is usually without the help of a lawyer, and litigation, which is the stuff that you guys do frequently here.
Okay, but wait a second, curveball. Do you even need to file a FOIA request? FOIA is a tool and public records laws generally are a tool. We're also going to talk about state public records requests. But at the end of the day, you're trying to find out a piece of information. So you have an idea, something you want to find out. And if FOIA or public records requests are the only way you're pursuing that, you might find yourself very frustrated. And it could also take a very long time. So if you're a reporter, if you're in the news business, time, currency is very important. And the most powerful tool these agencies have is time and just delaying you and wearing you down. So I would just say before you file a request, and this will also help you craft your request, think about where is this information stored, who generated it, who has access to it. And so with that in mind, you can look, you could look on Google, but you can look beyond in various, say a library or a library database, government websites. There might be results that don't show up in a basic online search that are there somewhere, a statistical report of the Department of Transportation. And also, maybe you can pick up the phone, maybe you know somebody who works in a given agency who might be able to hand you what you need. Another good source for information is lawsuits. A lot of things come to the surface when agencies get sued. So if there's been, think about if there's been a whistleblower or whatever policy you're interested in, say it's stop and frisk in New York City is controversial. It's the subject of extensive litigation. There's a lot of lawyers involved. And there's layers to that, there's what's in the court record, which could be online, could be something you have to go to the courthouse for. And then there's also what the lawyers have access to, which they may be able to share with you that's not in any public record, but could become public if you just picked up the phone. So this is just a stress to, be creative. Don't get stuck in your thinking that FOIA and public records requests are the only tool.
Yeah, that's right. Another really good FOIA reporter request from Mark Walker, the New York Times, says, treat your FOIA requests like you treat your reporting. And by that, he means that you really don't want to file a FOIA request until you do what Nathan just said and search everything else and pretty much tell the person on the other end where to search. We might get into that more. This one's fairly straightforward. You guys probably know that there's the federal FOIA, but that and the federal FOIA covers the executive branch, but not Congress and not the courts. They have some other weak access provisions, and generally they do post more proactively, but federal FOIA only covers executive branch. FOIA and the Presidential Record Act work in tandem to cover presidential records 5 years after the president leaves office. So that's federal. So once you finally get that figured out, every state has its own access to information law. Some are quite similar to federal, some are just kind of out there. Nathan's going to talk more about them, but just know that every state has its own law, which is often more effective than federal law, and then federal law has its own quirks. So finding out where to file, that first part of your reporting means, is this a state agency, federal agency? And the next step is figure out where to submit your request. Most of the time, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, that's once you figure the agency, if you just put the agency name in and then Google FOIA or open records, that generally will say the best way to do it.
I guess one thing I would say is, there are the bigger the agency, the more they try to bog you down in their opacity and anonymity. And so they might have a portal instead of an email. They might have, the portal is kind of the end all of what I'm talking about, but if at all possible, even if you have to file through the portal, you're going to want to try to find a name and a phone number and an email address for the person who's actually handling your request.
That's gold.
Because without that, it's very hard to follow up, and you're sort of at the mercy of this wall of the agency. So that's just a little note about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think most lawyers and reporters, the easiest for us is an email, straightforward, easy paper trail. You are usually going back and forth with someone. That I'm finding happens less and less. It's still fairly common. What's happening more and more of these portals, which is the online web form, because those are easier for the agencies. And there's a couple companies making them and advertising them. And then what happens every once in a while is you have to either call on the phone to get an address to snail mail something. So there are all types of levels. So the best one of my favorite resource for federal FOIA is the FOIA Wiki. This is Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which is a great press organization, puts this out. This is where I go to first. This website, FOIA.wiki, in my opinion, probably has everything that you need to file a FOIA request right there, from soup to nuts, beginning to the end. Well, I had to just put some some release records in here because I couldn't help myself. Another example of the power of FOIA. This is Trump's former chief of staff in an email that was released through FOIA to our friend Jason Leopold. Quote, FOIA is real and every day here in this cesspool, he wrote, essentially telling Trump employees not to use email or not to put things in an email that could be FOIA that you wouldn't want out. Yet the point of this email is to show the impracticality of that because it itself was released and was a bad news hit. And another kind of meta point is that in the federal government, things don't happen without a paper trail. So for all the talk of don't write when you can call, fair enough. But if things are happening, there's going to be a paper trail and there's a good chance you can use public records. For state records, the other great resource is, again, Reporters Committee, Open Government Guide. And all 50 states plus DC plus Puerto Rico and some other territories have this. They're all the same format. They're all done pro bono by law firms, I think, for the most part. And if you're starting from scratch at a state, this is the place to start again. The Reporters Committee Open Government Guides.
And then various states may have specific resources. In New York, we have this quasi-government agency called the Committee on Open Government. So you can call up and they'll give you advice on your request. And they also, you can formally ask them to issue an advisory opinion, which doesn't have legal weight, but it does make a legal analysis and a recommendation. And the agencies will consider it, and when they're kind of taking your temperature as to whether or not they have a leg to stand on, how they might do in court. And getting one of these advisory opinions also just shows you're serious. But when you're navigating these very complicated and obscure processes, it's nice to have a helping hand, a listening ear.
Just so you guys can see it, this is a typical FOIA request. And you know what? Having to put up there, frankly, this might be a little bit too much. This is I'm very proud of my template, blah, blah, blah. But all you really need is a line in every state. I haven't come up with a problem, and federal being under open records law, I request, and then that very good, very specific description of a record. I'm not saying do that. I'm saying you can do that. I'm saying you don't need all this stuff about segregability, all that stuff. Don't be intimidated. You really just need one line saying under public records laws, if it's federal, better to say under the FOIA, I am requesting. And then where you really want to put your effort is not this template, putting it into that very good, precise request language. Think strategically, fish where other people aren't fishing. There was even a better graph than this that I failed to put in that the Government Accountability Office just published last week, which shows that it's still the same. Basically, this is all of the federal agencies from their FOIA backlogs. And what you can see is the top 10 to 15 agencies are terrible. I hate to say it, it makes me almost cry. I tell my reporters, if you want to do a FOIA to the Department of State, you're going to have to sue to get records. They're right up there for that long. But the silver lining, these are all federal agencies, is that after 15, in this graph, there's about 100, depending how you count, there's over 200 agencies that are giving you records within 30 days. So despite everyone saying, oh, FOIA is broken, which I personally don't say, despite lots of the complaints, there are so many federal agencies that are following the law. And if you put a request in, you can get good records. Generally, the states are even better. If a reporter's thinking, should I file federal or state? I say both, but I tell them that you have a better chance if it's one of these big agencies of getting it from the states quicker. So think strategically about where you file.
Yeah, and I'm going to need to zoom in on this because I have several requests that are, many years out with the State Department, the FBI, the CIA, et cetera. But so another example of this on the local level is, say there's the police shoot someone in your town. You want to know more about what happened. You question the official narrative. Okay, so yes, you can foil the police. I'm saying foil in New York, it's the Freedom of Information Law. They all have different names. So, but there are other agencies responded to the scene. So maybe the fire department manages the ambulances. All agencies generate paperwork, and agencies talk to each other and exchange paperwork. So there's, maybe the fire department would have incident reports separate from the police. They would also potentially have some basic stuff from the police. You could also look at, the mayor's office made a statement, a few hours later. They must have gotten some information about what happened. They must have had some process for coming up with this statement. You can make a request of them. You could make a request of the medical examiner. An example of this sort of, strategy working is that I had some questions several years ago about a controversial homeless shelter program in New York City. I made requests with all the agencies I could think of that would be involved. The primary ones, the mayor's office, the Department of Homeless Services, they either said they had nothing that was responsive, or that what they had, they couldn't release for various reasons, mostly privacy. But I also foiled the Department of Buildings and the Department of Housing, Preservation and Development. New York is very bureaucratic, but one of these, say 8 agencies came back with hundreds of pages that really spelled out what I was interested in, and also included emails to the mayor's office from this politically connected law firm looking to cash in and sell these broken down buildings for an inflated value, which became its own whole other research project. And then they're an outside law firm, so I was able to foil all communications between that law firm and the mayor's office. But that's a whole other tangent. All I'm saying is government talks to each other. The agency that you think of as the main actor in a given situation isn't necessarily the only source of information.
All right. So on the part 2, once we figure out where you're going to file, the next part is what we're talking about, how to write that request. Basically, I'm going to repeat myself. You want to do your research on the front end and make it so that the records officer cannot help but know where this dang record you're requesting from. I know that we have some federal, might have some federal people on the Zoom or other state record people, and they can go back and forth. But sometimes I think, maybe I'm wrong, that federal records people like getting a badly crafted or overly broad request. And the reason why is they can write a letter back saying, your request is overly broad, done, see ya. So to stop that, and in general, to help them out, and in general, to get the records you want, you need to be as specific as possible. Right here at the bottom, we have endnotes. And that's a good example because I talk to my reporters all the time, so follow the footnotes. There was a great piece of reporting by my colleagues, Craig Whitlock, called the Afghanistan Papers. Basically, there was a U.S. agency, I can't help myself, this is a good story, that wrote these very bland reports about the war in Afghanistan. Wrote about, I think, a dozen of them, more than a dozen of them. And they didn't really say much. Special Inspector General for the war in SIGAR, war in Afghanistan. But they had all these footnotes from Secretary of State, generals, European ambassadors, people from the DEA. And my friend, Craig Whitlock, filed a FOIA for all of these interviews that were listed in footnotes. So step 1, they couldn't say, we can't find those. You say, no, they're footnoted right here. Step 2, it was a big fight, but we got them. And man, were they colorful. So somehow the government agency had sucked all the color out, kind of projected that the war in Afghanistan was going okay. But these high-ranking American officials and other countries' officials were saying in these interviews that we finally got that we're losing the war. So again, another example of following the footnotes. And 2, what government officials say in public records that you get through FOIA and other laws is often very different than what the government says in official positions. So an example of pointing to a specific record. I'm not going to go through all these, but some big ones. IG investigations and GAO reports. Those are 2 types of government records. Those are usually rife with footnotes. So if you're...
And Nate, can you tell us what those acronyms mean?
Yeah, thank you. Inspector General. So each federal agency has their own Office of Inspector General that does lots of reports. And GAO is Government Accountability Office, which is Congress, but they investigate the agencies and often get agency records. And they have lots of footnotes. So more often than not, if it's footnoted, you can use FOIA to do it, even though GAO is Government Accountability Office is technically legislative. Databases. If you request a database that you know exists, it's hard for the agency to say, we can't find that. And there's good case law saying they must release database. That's one discrete document. That's a good target. Contracts. Most states and most federal government have made clear that contracts or most parts of any contract has existed. So if you can know they did a contract with someone, good targeted requests. Schedules of people. Most law is now quite clear that every government official has to release their schedules, including online calendars, which, as I think we all know, are becoming more and more of a window in your lives. And then I did kind of rank these by importance at the very bottom because I don't like requesting them very much, is emails, but we will talk about them. All right, another window into what people say publicly and what they write privately. This is Donald Rumsfeld talking about, again, the Afghanistan war. We're never going to get the U.S. military out of Afghanistan unless we take care to see there is something going on that will provide the stability that will be necessary for us to leave. Help! 2002, Donald Rumsfeld. I don't remember him saying that in any press conferences in 2002, yet he was writing this to his staff. Again, the power of FOIA. What government says that they believe internally, they say something else externally. Brainstorming requests. So three quick ones. One, every federal agency and many states have FOIA reading rooms. These are kind of clunky, and some of them are very bad, but some of them are really great. So I bagged on the State Department before. I will say that they have the best FOIA reading room in the federal government. They have zillions of documents. Every time they release it to one person, within months, they put it up there. So check it out. That's probably the best example. But you don't want to waste your time, the agency's time, requesting something that's been already requested. On the other hand, if there is an application that one person submitted that's interesting, then you can use that. Say you release this on your FOIA reading room and I'm requesting this about another person, and kind of duplicate or replicate. So we can come back to that. Also, there's a great website I want to mention called muckrock.com. It's really good. It's good for doing a template for filing FOIAs. So you type it in, they kind of FOIA it for you. I personally don't use it. You can, I'm not going to get into it. But what is great about is it has all these FOIAs online on the web. So you can go there, click see all FOIAs. You can click sort by filed most recently, click filed in Connecticut, click successful, and then you can see 1,000 FOIAs in Connecticut that were successful, and then you can see which ones you want to replicate. It's a really great tool.
It's also a great resource for email addresses and phone numbers of FOIA officers.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, you can, if you're looking to reach somebody at an agency or target your request to that particular person, you can often find someone in the past has corresponded with them and get their information that way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Probably the best resource of that. The last one, Government Attic. It's a place that has, run by my friend. It is probably the best collection government-wide of FOIA logs. A FOIA log is a log of all the FOIA requests that an agency has. I don't want to get too caught up on them because I've gone to talks and all people talk about is doing FOIA logs, and my reporters sometimes come and say, help me. First, I want to get all the FOIA logs. But if you're doing a FOIA log, that's a year to maybe get it. And it's not, personally, I don't think it's that helpful. And why don't you file some real requests? Go to Government Attic, see the FOIA logs. That's my take on them. But that is the best repository.
Yeah,
maybe
but
Nathan
on the local level, I have, you know, I got a call once from a reporter in Arkansas, and he wanted to know about my FOIA request. And I said, "What? How did you find out about that?" And he, you know, makes a practice of periodically, I don't know how often, maybe every 6 months, he FOIAs the FOIA requests of the agencies he covers. And so I guess his mileage is better on the local level in Arkansas because it sounds like he gets pretty quick responses. And then he has all these ideas of what people are poking their noses into.
Yeah, it can be a good strategy. I would just say don't necessarily get bogged down in it. Sometimes people have a tendency to get in FOIA log universe. All right, so the meat of making the requests. We talked about this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's important. Make sure your request is as specific as possible. Make sure you say, if you can, this record is held in this office, maybe even this person. Definitely say this request was, this record is held by this person, this office. This record was created on or around this day or between date X and date Y. This record was referenced in this record that I've attached or this news story that I've attached. And I'm realizing that one more thing I'm going to stop. I should have said this at the start, but Freedom of Information Act is actually, it sounds great, FOIA, but it actually is a bad title because you cannot request information under FOIA. You can only request records, and every state is the same. So when I said when a FOIA officer gets a request and says, "Up, too broad, sorry, case closed," they will do the same thing if you request information. That's easy, their job's done. Nope, FOIA does not require us to give us information, only records. So I should have said that there, but better late than never. All of your requests, all of your targeted requests need to be for records. So get in the record state of mind.
And the thing they like to say is they're not required to generate new reports for you. So that's why it's important to think about how the information is compiled by the government agency, because an example is people will, myself included, like to ask for police disciplinary records, right? But within police departments, they're not called police disciplinary records. And so it's on you to figure out what they're called and how they're stored and who controls them, because otherwise you're asking for them to do work that they don't do. It's not part of their whole workflow to create new things, and that's not the role of these public records laws.
Another pitfall is you file the request, you forget about it. No, your job's not done. The request is probably not being worked on until the agency contacts you back and acknowledges and gives you a tracking number, or at least says we're working on the request. So if you file a request and you don't have an email back from the agency within a week, probably less, you need to reach back out, because there's a decent chance it's in the black hole, it's not being worked on. Mentioned it before, put yourself in the shoes of the FOIA responder. And one other note about that I want to mention, I'm a big friend. I have lots of friends that are FOIA responders. I'm part of the trade industry group for them called ASAP. I go to the conference with them, rub elbows with them. They are generally very good. They are not the reason for the delays. The reason for the delays, I'm speaking more federally now, is if there's a FOIA request for a record in the State Department, the FOIA person asks the person whose desk or computer it is to please give me that record. And that is the person that sometimes for years will ignore those requests. So most of the time, these FOIA people that you are talking with often don't have the power to go walk down the hall and get the record, or go on the computer and get the record. One of the problems of FOIA is this link that they are beheld by to so-called subject matter experts, SMEs, which just means normal employee, to give them the records. And usually the cause of the delay, in my opinion, is the subject matter experts not doing it. Think of filing FOIA requests as planting acorns. The best requesters at the Post are filing several requests a week, and then they get back one batch of documents a month. But guess what? That batch of documents is a good story. FOIA is a process. If you're doing it as one-off, kind of reactive, being like, oh, the senator I cover was in the news, I got to file a FOIA about this, it's not going to be as good as I'm covering this senator, so I'm going to file a couple of FOIAs on him every week and see what happens. Just want to mention, because we're lawyers here, there are two in federal FOIA confusing statutes on fees. In general, I'm not going to go into it. You want to be news media fee status is much more helpful to you, and you probably will not get charged any fees at all. Fee waiver is much less helpful for you. Despite the flashy sounding name, fee waiver is for the public. If you can get news media status, that's what you want. We can go into that in questions if you want. It's a little complicated, but all you need to know is get news media fee status. And expedited processing I might talk about if Nathan doesn't have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, you could talk about it, but I have two examples about expedited processing. So, my understanding, obviously these federal requests especially can take years. And so all of us, I'm assuming human nature, we want it faster. So we ask to expedite. But the criteria for getting expedited processing, there are two main grounds that you can argue. One is that it's a matter of life and death. Someone's safety is at issue. And two is that it's a matter of urgent and broad public concern. And I'm not a lawyer, so if I got the wording wrong, don't at me. But So two examples. One, I've asked for expedited processing in situations where someone is incarcerated. They are saying they're innocent. And I've argued, at the time that coronavirus was out of control in prisons, prisons are generally a dangerous place. I've been denied on that several times. So that's, as much as it makes sense to me, not an argument that works with the FBI and the DEA. Example two, you may recall 2016, 11 days before the presidential election, FBI Director James Comey comes out and says that Hillary Clinton is under investigation still. So there's a gentleman, very interesting fellow. His main job is helping connect art that was looted by the Nazis with the descendants of their rightful owners. But he took an interest in this as a voter and American citizen and someone with time on his hands. So he FOIA'd the underlying search warrant for, I believe it was Huma Abedin's laptop. He asked for expedited processing. He didn't get it in time for the election, but he had a strong argument. He took it to court and won, I think in December, so not long after the election. And the argument being that a federal law enforcement agency's involvement in a presidential election is a matter of widespread public concern.
I would just add, we can talk about this later, but this is fun legal because there is lots of case law on magic words and such to use expedited processing. In the federal level, it's very hard to get. I think less than 10% of all requests for expedited get it. So if you're filing a FOIA and you get it, feels great. And what that means, doesn't mean that you're going to get documents within 10 days even. That's what the law says. But it means that you cut the front of the line. On the graphics here, this one is, in FOIA circles, this is very famous. I could not do it. It's everything redacted except it says the snack car. There's a request to Amtrak. The article there is just to say, in all facets, even if you're writing a brief to a judge, weigh into the power of these redactions. The public loves seeing redacted documents. If you're writing, get a redacted document in your story if you can. If there's if you're trying to argue that stuff's over redacted or just 3 words of 30 pages were released, put a screenshot in there. A judge will like it too. More chillingly, there's another document that looks just like that, except the 3 words that are unredacted are the water board. So they're funny FOIAs and unfunny FOIAs. All right, emails. What everyone likes to know and curious about, and I don't think is that effective of a FOIA, but don't worry, Nathan and I will share the magic email language to you. So the bottom line is that if you're requesting, so first, why don't I like emails? I say it kind of tongue in cheek, but the reason is because my reporter friends is always the only thing they think about. Whereas that page about 10 slides back of all those good documents, those are all better targets than emails. The reason why is the federal level, there is a exemption 5 pre-deliberative process that judges and agencies have been making stronger and stronger and stronger. That means it's very hard to get anything of substance released from an email. There's some carve outs and we can talk about it. But the bottom line is federal FOIA emails just won't tell you much.
Counterpoint. I did 2 state FOIL requests in New York for emails that turned into front page stories in the Daily News.
Well, that's true. And states are often much stronger than federal. So, and again, all of my poo-pooing is tongue in cheek. But file the federal FOIA. We're going to give you the magic language, and definitely file the state language, because the state FOIAs, because their laws allowing them to be redacted are not as strong as federal. And the other point I wanted to make was that, again, when you're requesting emails, you need to put yourself in the chair of the agency's IT administrator that is searching for the emails. It's not going to be the FOIA person. It's going to be an IT guy. And usually they are using probably Microsoft Outlook. So you need to think, if I was searching for these emails via Microsoft Outlook, how would I do it? Generally, this language will do all emails sent to or from email account X, Y, and Z, and or Z. The and or is important, from date X to date Y, mentioning the terms X, Y, and or Z. And you can play around with that. There's many permutations, but that's the bottom line. You want to be careful about the terms X, Y, and Z. You want to be really specific. You want to have your date range as narrow as possible. If you do a date range as a year, like 1 year, January to December, you are probably not going to, they're probably going to reject your request outright, or you're probably going to wait 3, 4, 5 years for it. Emails, you have to be really targeted. Language. So a lot of the time reporters will get back 100 pages of email, but a lot of it is just summaries of news that's sent around the office that mentions the term, which sucks. So try and omit that. Some agencies will, some won't. A lot of times agencies request emails, and all it is the requesters request emails, and all you get back is the agency's PR office talking to reporters about an incident, which probably means that you didn't say search the account of the secretary or the key person. Second bullet point, I'm not going to read all of it, but that's just to say, think about your own email inbox right now. Thinking about mine. I got 100 emails
out
today.
No, I'm thinking about it and I'm stressed. But go on.
Yeah, me too. But I probably got 100 emails today. Probably 5 of them were important. And of those 5, I probably responded to 4 of them. So instead of requesting all emails sent to Nate Jones today and getting a bunch of junk, you could say all emails that Nate Jones replied to today and give me the whole email chains. That's an advanced strategy. We have it here now.
Yeah, and on the last point, it's just helpful if you can include any specific email addresses, but you don't want to limit yourselves to those because, especially prominent officials like to have secret Finsta type emails. So if there's a benevolent FOIA officer out there who feels like giving you those emails too, you don't want to say you're not interested. But so you can including but not limited to is very useful language. Or hopeful. It's optimistic that they're gonna come through with the stuff you don't know about. So broad requests. Okay. Example, you hear, okay, there's been a burglary at the Watergate apartment building, the Democratic National Headquarters. That's weird, right? Okay. You dash off a FOIA request to the DC Metro Police, all documents relating to Watergate break-in. Okay. So that's, silly example, but you might get something, but they're probably going to say it's too broad. And so you have to think about, as we said before, you have to think about what the agency does day to day, how they store information. And if possible, get the names of the forms that they use and the databases that they use. You can get these from past documents in places we talked about earlier, like Muckrock and anywhere that government documents have been published. You also, if you have any officials or retired officials from these agencies, they can maybe, who are friendly to you, they can maybe walk you through. Like, so an example is, you request police reports. Police don't store police reports as police reports. They have 50,000 different types of police reports. You got your DD5s, your UF41s, complaint report, interview follow-up report. So every agency has its own lingo, and it's helpful for you to learn some of that. But then, of course, you want to not limit it to those because there's all this other stuff you don't know about. But include the names of forms, the names of databases. There's the internal affairs of the NYPD has specific databases, and they transitioned at like certain points in time. So if you include those specific names of the databases, it's hard. The whole goal is to make it harder for them to say no, or to say that they don't know where to look, or that they can't find anything. So, think the address, if we're going crime, what precinct it's in, the names of the responding officers, any specific email addresses and phone numbers. And that's what I have on that one.
All right. Tracking your requests. Like I said, if you're doing a good job, if you're a great requester, you're planting acorns, but you're not forgetting about them. Me personally, and most people at the Washington Post just use a simple Excel spreadsheet or Google form, any type of spreadsheet. But the thing you want to have is the day you requested it, a brief description that'll allow you to remember or find it wherever it is. whether the request was acknowledged or not to make sure the agency is acknowledging. If you have a contact, that's great. And maybe when the next deadline is, so maybe when you're allowed to appeal.
Yeah, and again, the strongest tool that they have is just time. And so if you forget about your own request, odds are they might just go ahead and forget about it too. So definitely, whatever works for you, calendar reminders, spreadsheets are very helpful, especially the more you have going at once. And it's just to help you stay on top of your requests. And when you're inquiring about your requests, it's helpful to have the number in front of you and the dates that you filed and so on, so that they can know what you're talking about. So this is sort of a meta point, but in life, there are, on the one hand, you have rules and laws, right, that are supposed to govern how things work. On the other hand, there are people who are administering those things, right? So, say you work in an office, you want to get your expenses approved and get reimbursed for something. It's helpful in that situation to have a good relationship with the office manager, because if she doesn't like you, oops, she could have missed your email and you could spend several months without those expenses reimbursed. So, it's like anything in life, like you're trying to get seen at a hospital, you're trying to visit someone in prison, you're trying to get a file from a courthouse, whatever it is. The same thing goes with FOIA. Public records laws have no teeth. The worst thing that can happen, generally speaking, if a agency doesn't respond in time or doesn't give you everything that you're supposed to get, is that you could sue them. And then after a very long process that's expensive for you, the government might cover your attorney's fees. But still, it's like the one thing they can get in trouble for is giving you too much stuff and stuff that they weren't supposed to give you. So, for example, in LA recently, some activists FOIA'd, I don't know the whole scope of their request, but the FOIA office gave them the pictures and identities of all sorts of undercover officers and informants, which they then published on the internet. So I'm I don't know what happened there, but I would imagine that FOIA officer is in some trouble, and there are a lot of ramifications within that office. So so just be nice, get along with people. And there's an old adage in journalism that I'll just say that you should make love over email and make war over the phone. Here we're all about love. We want to be assertive, but I don't know, Nate, you can weigh in on this, but in general, if you lose the FOIA officer, you've lost the FOIA request. So don't be, it's helpful to have things in writing if you do end up in court, but also don't be afraid to pick up the phone and just try to nicely ask what's going on with my request.
The Harold Cross, the journalist that actually started pushing through FOIA in the 1950s, wrote, sugar is better than vinegar. So that's probably good in all things life, including FOIAs. All right, so we are 5 minutes out. You guys are thinking about your questions, right? So we might go a little bit quickly on the next two and we'll bring them back in the Q&A, but think about your questions. 5, appeal. So this is data that shows on this one over here, shows according to AP data in federal FOIA, every time someone appeals, about a third of all requests, more information is released. So that's a pretty good win rate, or it is remanded. But over here, it shows under federal FOIA, just 1 or 2% of all requests are appealed. So what I think when I extrapolate that out is that there is a huge amount of information that's being denied on the front end that should be released. Why? One reason is that the people that deny it initially are much lower level. To deny it on the next end, it has to be a much higher government official, usually a lawyer, that has to sign their name on a piece of paper saying, I uphold that nothing can be released. Often lawyers are unwilling to do that. They say, let me take another look. No, you didn't cite the exemption right. Give it another run. So an administrative appeal, which really is just a letter, is a powerful tool. As here's an example from me and Craig Whitlock's greatest hits. This is a foreign government employee questionnaire from General Mattis, who on the first round at the bottom, he said that he was just going to have a standard salary. But after we appealed and won, we got the actual price, which was 40 to 80,000 a month. So some people might call that standard, but thankfully someone at the agency said, nope, you didn't properly cite the personnel exemption to deny this rather high salary. I'm going to go quickly through this and we can come back to it in questions. But an appeal is just a letter. And it's a letter written with, at least my law school, we did IRAC, but that will serve you well in just an informal FOIA appeal. And further rules and the laws, go back to the FOIA wiki and say, oh, you cited exemption 1. This case says exemption 1 can be used for this, but rather here, the circumstances are different. Therefore, please unredact all information withheld under exemption 1. It's just a letter, but it's really good practice. And people that are writing those, that 1/3 of them are not law students, not lawyers. They're lay people. So you had a good shot of winning your appeals. Finally, consider litigation.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I know we're dragging on, but
Please.
on the grounds for appeal, constructive denial is an important one. So the constructive denial is just a fancy term for the government ghosting you. So, you know, if they've missed their deadlines or just stopped responding altogether, that's the basis for an appeal. And it's pretty straightforward. You just lay out the timeline, either when they were supposed to respond or said they'd respond, and then when you last heard from them. So that's another reason it's important to track all this in a spreadsheet, so you can be on top of it and file that constructive denial appeal right when they missed their deadline.
That's right. And I was rushing too fast too. If they missed the deadline, you can appeal. If they give you the wrong fee status, you can appeal. If they deny you expedited processing, you can appeal. So it's not just denials of records. It's in the federal level, it's any adverse determination. It might be helpful just on the timeline. So if you are, or your client is a reporter, if you're in this is what I tell my friends at the Washington Post, in the federal level, if you're in the expedited track, great. That means you cut the line. Doesn't mean you're going to get the records tomorrow, but it means you're probably in the best position. If you're in a simple processing track, also good. And all of this is based on FOIA statistics that the agencies post. If you are in the complex track, that is probably very bad. That means you're probably not going to get records for years. So what do? One, you can try a constructive denial appeal, like we just talked about, saying you went over the deadline, I want the records. Sometimes this helps just because in the real world, when there are other agencies poking the agency, they'll say, okay, we'll get this done with, so annoying Nate or annoying Nathan will leave us alone. Sometimes it doesn't work. If they say your estimated date of completion is 2 years, your requester's best bet is probably to litigate. At the Washington Post, the fastest I've seen is we filed our complaint and we got records within a week. Usually, once the complaint, the response, and the answer and the response are filed, and if you get a good judge that gives you a good production schedule, I know I'm in the weeds, but I'm at Yale Law School, it means that you can start getting records in 4.5 months. So if you're looking at 2 years to 4.5 months, what I tell the newsroom is, let's consider doing it, and we'll talk more about the considerations. So this is what the Post considers, and I think many requesters do, is the law on your side. If it's 50-50 case, it would have to be very explosive for us to sue. Usually the stuff we sue on is usually 90-10, we're going to win. So we usually sue when we think we're going to win. Is it an issue of delay, like we just talked about? That puts the government on the back foot. The judge says, wait, you haven't responded in X amount. The FOIA says you have to do it in 20 days. And then they'll say, oh, open America. And the judge will say, production schedule, 500 pages a month every month or 1,000 pages a month. Big win. In the news business, we consider Will they be newsworthy when you win? So if we're lucky and we start getting records in 4.5 months, will this still be a good news story? If not, you probably shouldn't use the resources. And then finally, fee shifting. What is our chances of, if we win, the judge is going to make the agency pay the post some or all of their attorney's fees, which is consideration. We'll talk about that more maybe.
To reiterate,
Go for it.
figure out where to file, figure out what the law is that applies in your situation. Make sure to target the FOIAs. Emails. Nate doesn't like them. I do, but it sounds like federally it's more difficult. Make sure to stay on top of your FOIAs and the FOIA officers responding to them. Always appeal. If you don't like the outcome, including redactions. We didn't really get into that, but you can appeal redactions. So agencies like to black out the important stuff, and you can challenge that as well as just a non-response.
And litigation, which we can talk more about all of this, including that at Q&A, but I'll leave you with one more of my favorite documents from recently departed Secretary Kissinger. He was talking about probably illegally supplying weapons to Turkey. And his aide says that would be illegal. And Kissinger says, before the Freedom of Information Act, I used to say at meetings, the illegal we do immediately. The unconstitutional takes a little longer. But since the Freedom of Information Act, I'm afraid to say things like that. We'll make a major effort. Unfortunately, or fortunately for Mr. Kissinger, this meeting minute was released via FOIA. So now we know what he said and what he did.